At the end of November, the secretary from Oliver's school called me around 10 a.m. Your son collapsed during gym class, she said. They were playing dodgeball. He lost consciousness briefly. My heart stopped. She quickly added that he was awake now, that the school nurse had checked him and he seemed stable, but they wanted to send him home. They tried calling Brooke and Jeffrey repeatedly and couldn't reach either of them. You're listed as the third emergency contact, she said. I didn't wait for her to finish. I drove to Riverside Central Middle School as fast as traffic allowed. The school was large, functional, and worn in the way public schools often are. Long concrete buildings. Narrow hallways lined with lockers dented by decades of use. Faded banners celebrating teams and academic achievements from years past. Everything built for volume, not intimacy. I found the main office and identified myself. The principal met me there and walked me down a quiet hallway toward the nurse's office. When I saw Oliver, I stopped short. It wasn't just that he was pale. His eyes were sunken, dark circles carved beneath them. His face looked sharp, hollowed out in a way no 12-year-old should. He was thin, too thin, like he'd lost weight quickly. His clothes hung off him. He looked small, not like a growing boy, like a 10-year-old who hadn't caught up yet. In that moment, everything else, the trust, the arguments, the consequences, fell away. All I could see was my child. Dad, he said when he saw me. His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. Dad, you came. The word hit me harder than anything else had. Not William, not hesitation. Just Dad. I crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt in front of him. Of course I came, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my chest tightened. I'm here. He nodded, swallowing hard, like he'd been holding something back for a long time. His hands were trembling slightly in his lap. The nurse explained what had happened: dehydration, exhaustion, and low blood sugar. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to scare everyone involved. I barely heard her. Oliver kept looking at me, like he was afraid I might disappear if he blinked. When she finished, the room went quiet. They couldn't get hold of your mom or Jeffrey, she said gently. That's okay, Oliver whispered, not looking at her. Then, softer, almost to himself, you came. I put my hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it without thinking. In that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. Whatever papers had been signed, whatever names had been changed, whatever systems had moved on without him, I was still the person he looked for when he was scared. And he was still my son. We drove home in silence. Oliver drifted in and out of sleep in the passenger seat, his head resting against my shoulder whenever the car stopped at a light. His breathing was shallow but steady. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other lightly against his back, feeling how small he felt, how fragile. I looked down at him and something dark and hot began to rise inside me. Rage. Not loud. Not explosive. The kind that settles deep in your chest and tightens your jaw until it hurts. What had they done to him? They had promised him a better life, more opportunity, more care, more presence. And instead, here he was, exhausted, underfed, hollow-eyed, passed out on a gym floor while the people who insisted they were his real family couldn't even be reached. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The anger wasn't about money or names or trust anymore. It was about neglect dressed up as success. About adults who were so busy winning that they forgot to protect the child they claimed to love. Oliver shifted slightly and murmured something in his sleep. I slowed the car without realizing it. Whatever lines had been drawn before, legal, emotional, or otherwise, one thing was suddenly very clear to me: this wasn't over. We arrived at the house half an hour later. I parked in the driveway and turned off the engine. Oliver was already asleep. I lifted him carefully from the car, surprised by how little he weighed. He felt almost weightless in my arms, far too light for a boy's age. I carried him up to his room and laid him gently on the bed, pulling the blanket up around his shoulders. His eyes fluttered open for a moment. You still have my room, he said softly, half asleep. Of course, buddy, I replied. I went back down to the kitchen and put together a small tray, juice, crackers, something easy on his stomach. Simple, familiar things he liked. When I returned to his room, he was awake again. He lay on his side, facing the wall, his back to me. I set the tray down quietly on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't rush him. I didn't push. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the house. I could see his shoulders rise and fall as he breathed, tense but controlled, like he was holding something in. I stayed there anyway, waiting. I sat down on the edge of the bed. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I stayed still, letting him speak. Everyone hates me, he said. Mason and Freddie don't want anything to do with me anymore. Easton, Philip, Tanner, Ethan, and my other friends. None of them talk to me either. He swallowed. I don't see Grandpa and Grandma or Aunt Alicia. Nobody comes around or invites me. His voice broke. I get bullied at school. He started crying then, the kind of crying kids do when they've been holding it in for too long. They hit me, he said. They call me posh. Like I think I'm better than everyone. I reached out, but I didn't touch him yet. You hate me, Dad, he whispered. My chest tightened painfully. I don't hate you, buddy, I said gently. I never have. You're the most important person in my life. He turned toward me then, tears streaking his face. But you gave me away, he said. I asked you to say no. I said you could say no. The words landed hard. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't argue. I just sat there, letting him say it, because he needed to. You're right, I said quietly after a moment. You did say I could say no. My voice wavered despite my effort to keep it steady. And I should have protected you better. I thought I was respecting your choice. I didn't realize how much pressure you were under. That's on me, buddy. He watched my face carefully, like he was testing whether it was safe to believe me. But I never gave you away, I continued. I lost my way for a moment, but I never stopped being your dad. Not for 1 second. His breathing slowed a little. I finally put my arm around him, and this time he didn't pull away. He leaned into me like he used to, small, tired, and desperately needing somewhere to land. I am not eating anymore, he said, his voice barely there. He hesitated, then the words fell out all at once. I just wanted to end. I don't want to live anymore. Everything in me went still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't panic. I moved closer and took his face gently in my hands, so he had to look at me. No, I said firmly, but softly. Listen to me. You are not ending anything tonight. You are not alone, and you are not going anywhere. His eyes filled again. I don't know how to make it stop, Dad. My heart broke cleanly in two. I know, I said, and that's not your job to fix. It's mine. I pulled him into my chest and held him, really held him, feeling how thin he was, how tense. He didn't resist. He collapsed into me like he'd been waiting for permission. What you're feeling doesn't mean you want to die, I said quietly. It means you're in pain. And pain lies. It tells you there's no way out when there is. He shook against me, crying now. I'm here, I told him. And I'm not leaving you. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. I stayed with him until his breathing slowed, until his body stopped shaking. Just before he drifted off, his voice came again, thin, barely holding. Dad, my phone, he murmured. Look at my phone. His eyes closed before I could ask what he meant. He was asleep. I stayed still for a second, listening to his breathing, making sure it was steady. Then I gently slid the phone from his hand. I didn't sit down. I didn't overthink it. I unlocked the screen. The first thing I saw was a group chat. Messages stacked on top of each other. Names I recognized. Names I didn't. Posh freak. Go back to your mansion. No one wants you here. Why don't you just disappear? My hands started shaking. Then I saw the search history. Questions a 12-year-old should never be asking. I felt something cold settle into my bones. Not panic, not anger. Clarity. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't kids being kids. This was danger. When I opened the videos, my heart almost stopped. The phone must have been in his pocket. There was no image, only sound. Muffled at first, then clearer. Jeffrey's voice, sharp, cold. You are nothing, he was shouting. Your own father didn't even want you. My hands began to shake. I scrolled further, and then I froze. Another recording was dated the day after Oliver had last stayed with me. The day we'd visited my parents. The day I tried one final time to protect him. Oliver's voice came through first, small, steady, but scared. I don't want my name changed, he said. I don't want to be adopted. I'm an Aldridge. There was a pause. Then Jeffrey spoke again, low, deliberate. Listen to me, you little brat, he said. Do you remember what I told you about the hitman? I stopped breathing. I can call him right now, Jeffrey continued. He's already in a neighbor's house. He has a rifle pointed at your father. If I tell him to, he'll kill him. Oliver whimpered. The recording ended. There were more. Message after message. Threats. Threats against me. Threats against Brooke. Threats against Oliver. All tied to one demand, agreed to the adoption. I sat there in the dark, the phone clenched in my hand, my entire body numb. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't pressure. This was terror. My son hadn't chosen anything. He had been forced. In that moment, every doubt I'd carried disappeared. Every hesitation burned away. This wasn't about repairing a relationship anymore. It was about protecting a child from a man who should never be allowed near him again. I looked at Oliver sleeping in my bed, finally safe for the first time in months. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. I didn't hesitate. I took screenshots of everything. The audio files, the timestamps, the metadata. Then I called the police. Not the local non-emergency line. Emergency. I told them exactly what I had. Threats against a child. Recorded death threats. Coercion. Extortion. Psychological abuse. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I played the recordings for them in the living room while Oliver slept upstairs. They didn't interrupt. They didn't ask skeptical questions. When the last recording ended, one of them quietly closed his notebook and said, "Sir, this is very serious." They called it what it was: criminal threats, child abuse, coercion, and witness intimidation. The hitman detail didn't matter. What mattered was that a child had believed it. That fear had been used to force a legal decision. They assured me Oliver would not be returning to that house. Not tonight. Not without court orders. A welfare check was dispatched immediately to Brooke and Jeffrey's residence. Child Protective Services was notified before the officers even left my driveway. When the door finally closed behind them, I picked up my phone and called Robert McCoy. He answered on the first ring. "Robert," I said, "I need you now." I told him everything. The recordings, the threats, the police. He went silent for a moment, then his voice changed completely. "William," he said, "listen carefully. Do not let Oliver out of your sight. I'm activating emergency custody proceedings tonight." I heard typing, fast, focused. "This invalidates the adoption," he continued. "Consent obtained under threat is void. The name change, the custody modification, everything is challengeable." "How fast?" I asked. "Immediately," he said. "I'm filing for an emergency restraining order against Jeffrey. Temporary sole custody to you. Protective orders for both you and Oliver. I'll have a judge by morning." "And the trust?" "One step at a time," Robert replied. "First, we make your son safe. Then we repair what was done under duress." I looked up the stairs toward Oliver's room. "He never chose this," I said. "No," Robert agreed. When the call ended, I stood there for a long moment in the quiet house. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. Whatever came next, courtrooms, consequences, rebuilding, it would happen with my son protected, believed, and no longer alone. And that was where the story finally began to turn. Then I went back to the bed and sat beside him, one hand resting on his back so he could feel me if he woke. I didn't leave him alone for even a second. As the house finally settled into silence again, I looked down at the phone in my hands. And beneath the anger, beneath the fear, beneath the shock, I felt something else. Pride, not the loud kind. Not the kind you celebrate. The deep, aching kind that comes from realizing your child was stronger and smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He had known something was wrong. He had been scared, but not powerless. In the middle of threats, pressure, and isolation, he had found a way to protect himself. Quietly, carefully. He had recorded everything. He had preserved the truth when no adult around him would. A 12-year-old shouldn't have to think like that. But he did. And because of that, the lies couldn't survive. He was sleeping deeply now, finally resting. I brushed a hand through his hair, the way I used to when he was little. "You did good, buddy," I said softly, even though he couldn't hear me. "You were brave. You were smart. And you saved yourself." I stayed awake until morning, watching his chest rise and fall, knowing that this was the moment everything changed. Not because I'd lost him, but because I wasn't going to. The knock on the Thornton mansion door came an hour later after I had called the police. Not loud. Not polite. Firm enough that it couldn't be ignored. Brooke was the one who opened the door. She was in a robe, irritation already on her face, until she saw the uniforms. 2 police officers. A CPS caseworker standing slightly behind them, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Thornton?" one of the officers asked. "Yes," Brooke said, confused now. "What is this about?" "We're here regarding your son, Oliver Thornton," the officer replied. "May we come in?" "Oliver is at school," she said with a tight worries in her voice. Jeffrey appeared behind her, already annoyed. "This is unnecessary," he said. "Whatever this is, you can speak to our lawyer." The officer didn't argue. He stepped forward. "Sir," he said calmly, "this is a welfare check involving allegations of criminal threats and coercion against a minor. This is not optional." The room changed. They were led inside. The CP's caseworker introduced herself and immediately took control of the conversation. She explained, slowly, clearly, that recorded evidence had been provided. Audio recordings, multiple instances. Threats made directly to a child. Jeffrey laughed once. Short, sharp. "This is absurd." The officer didn't react. "We're going to ask you both to sit down," he said. Brooke's face had gone pale. "What recordings?" she asked. "This has to be a misunderstanding." The caseworker set the clipboard down on the coffee table. "Mrs. Thornton," she said gently, "your son recorded threats made to him. Threats involving violence against his father, against you and against Oliver. These recordings have been reviewed." Jeffrey stood up. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You can't seriously, sir," the second officer said, hand resting casually near his belt. "Sit down." Jeffrey hesitated. Then he sat. The CPS worker continued. "Based on what we reviewed, we are issuing an immediate protective order. Oliver will not be returning to this home." Brooke's breath caught. "What?" "You can't. He lives here." "He does not," the caseworker said calmly. "Not tonight. And not until a court reviews this." Brooke turned to Jeffrey. "What did you do?" Jeffrey didn't answer. The officer looked directly at him. "Mr. Thornton, you are being advised that anything you say from this point forward may be used against you." "That's insane," Jeffrey said. "I didn't hurt anyone." "You threatened to," the officer replied. "Repeatedly. To a child." Silence filled the room. Brooke started crying then. Not quietly. Not controlled. She kept saying she didn't know. That she never heard anything like that. That Oliver must have misunderstood. The CPS worker listened. Then she said, "Mrs. Thornton, the recordings are very clear." Jeffrey finally exploded. "You're all overreacting," he said. "Kids exaggerate." He was emotional. "I was trying to discipline him." The officer stood. "Sir," he said, "you're being detained for questioning." Jeffrey stared at him. "Detained?" "Yes." Handcuffs came out. Not slammed on, not dramatic. Just procedure. Brooke screamed his name. The CPS worker didn't flinch. She turned to Brooke once more. "Mrs. Thornton," she said, "you will be contacted regarding next steps. For now, you are not to attempt to contact Oliver. A temporary restraining order is being issued." Brooke collapsed onto the couch. As Jeffrey was escorted out, he didn't look back. The house, so carefully curated, so expensive, felt suddenly small. Exposed. By morning, everything was in motion. The house hadn't slept. Neither had I. Somewhere between the hours before dawn and the first gray light creeping in through the windows, the weight of the night began to translate into action. Robert had done exactly what he said he would. By 7:30 a.m., an emergency hearing had been scheduled, off the normal calendar, outside routine hours. A judge had already reviewed the recordings, the police incident report, and CPS's preliminary findings before sunrise. No delays, no requests for clarification, no hesitation. This wasn't being treated as a domestic dispute. It was being treated as an emergency. We sat in a quiet courtroom just before noon. No spectators, no press, just process. Oliver wasn't there. He didn't need to be. The evidence spoke for him. The judge didn't waste time. The ruling came quickly, delivered in a calm, steady voice that carried absolute authority. Temporary sole custody was granted to me, effective immediately. A no-contact restraining order was issued against Jeffrey, prohibiting any form of communication, direct or indirect, with Oliver or me. Brooke was granted supervised contact only, pending the outcome of the ongoing CPS investigation and further psychological evaluations. No unsupervised visits. No discretion. The court then addressed the adoption and name change. Both were formally placed under legal challenge, flagged as actions executed under credible allegations of coercion, psychological abuse, and criminal threat. The judge made it clear, consent obtained under fear is not consent at all. Nothing was reversed yet. But everything was frozen. No further legal changes. No enforcement of the adoption. No recognition of the name change for any purpose until the court completed its review. The machinery that had once moved so effortlessly against us had stopped. For the first time since this began, since the pressure, the manipulation, the quiet erasure, the system wasn't working against my son. It was working for him. And as we walked out of that courtroom, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end of the fight, but it was the end of being powerless. I called my grandfather that afternoon and told him everything. I didn't soften it. I didn't skip the ugly parts. I told him about the recordings, the threats, the fear Oliver had lived with in silence, about the adoption being forced, about the trust doing exactly what it was designed to do, and about how that design had failed a child who needed protection, not principle. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line, long enough that I wondered if he had put the phone down. Then he spoke. "William," he said quietly, "we failed Oliver." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. "We failed one of our own," he continued. "We were hurt. We were proud. And instead of fighting for him, we stepped back and told ourselves we were respecting the system." He exhaled slowly. "We all knew that boy. We knew his character. We knew he wasn't manipulative or greedy or disloyal. And still, we let paperwork speak louder than judgment." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to add. I felt ashamed. "We should have seen through this," my grandfather said. "We should have questioned it. We should have asked why an 11-year-old would walk away from his name so easily." His voice hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. "This family doesn't survive because of money," he said. "It survives because we correct our mistakes." He didn't hesitate after that. "I'm calling an extended family meeting tonight," he said. "All beneficiaries 18 and over. Trustees included." That alone told me how serious this was. These meetings didn't happen often. When they did, it meant something fundamental was being addressed. "This isn't about blame," he continued. "It's about responsibility. We built systems to protect the family. If those systems can be used to harm a child, then they need to be examined by the people they were meant to serve." Before hanging up, he said one last thing. "Oliver is still an Aldridge," he said. "And tonight, the family will act like it." When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand. For months, the story had been about loss, about doors closing and systems enforcing consequences without mercy. For the first time, it felt like something else was beginning. Not a reversal, a reckoning. When my grandfather pressed the button on his phone to call the meeting, an alert went out to every Aldridge over the age of 18. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a text. It was an internal emergency signal, one that hadn't been used in years. Phones buzzed simultaneously in offices, homes, cars, and airports across the country. From New York to California, from Texas to the Midwest, people stopped what they were doing and checked their screens. Mandatory family assembly. Immediate. There were no questions. There never were. Within hours, flights were booked. Cars were packed. Assistants cleared schedules. The only ones not expected to arrive in person were those already overseas, and even they were instructed to join by secure video link. This was serious. The meeting would be held at Aldridge Corporation headquarters. I drove Oliver to my parents' house before heading downtown. He sat quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped in his favorite hoodie, Adidas's track pants bunched around his ankles. He'd eaten properly for the first time in days. He'd had a long bath. His hair was still damp. He almost looked like himself again. Almost. Still pale, still too thin, but present. When we pulled into the driveway, my mother was already outside. She didn't wait for the door to open. She wrapped Oliver in a hug the second he stepped out of the car, holding him longer than usual, her hand resting protectively on the back of his head. She immediately started fussing, asking what he wanted to eat later, if he was warm enough, if he wanted to watch a movie or just rest. Then Alicia arrived. She hugged him fiercely, whispered something in his ear that made his eyes well up again, and promised she wasn't going anywhere. Then Joshua's car pulled in. Mason jumped out before the engine was even off. The moment Oliver saw him, his face changed completely. Mason ran straight to him, arms wide, and they collided in a hug so tight they both started crying. No words. Just relief. Just the sound of two boys who thought they'd lost each other realizing they hadn't. Freddie followed a moment later. He hesitated, awkward and sure, trying to be older than he felt, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Oliver too. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't polished. But it was real. Oliver's shoulders finally relaxed. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone in a room full of people. My father watched the scene quietly. Then he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Mom will take care of him," he said. "Let's go." Oliver looked up at me as I grabbed my jacket. "Dad, I'll be back," I said. "This is just something the grown-ups need to fix." He nodded. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed him when he relaxed back into the couch, surrounded by people who loved him. My father, Joshua, Alicia, and I drove downtown together. No one spoke much. Ahead of us, the Aldridge Corporation headquarters rose against the evening sky, glass, steel, and quiet authority. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, the Aldridges weren't coming together to protect assets. They were coming together to protect one of their own. One by one, they arrived over the next several hours. Each was greeted personally by the patriarch of the family, my grandfather, Alan Cornelius Aldridge. He stood near the entrance of the family room, back straight despite his age, his presence steady and unmistakable. No speeches. No ceremony. Just a nod, a handshake, sometimes a brief embrace. Everyone understood the seriousness of being summoned like this. We were the first to arrive. Then the cars began to pull up. The children of Uncle Gerald arrived next, Rossmore Eugene and Rhoda Aldridge. They entered together, faces set, already aware that this meeting was about more than policy or inheritance. Soon after came my Uncle Thomas Aldridge, followed by his daughters, Vivian and Judith. Vivian carried herself with the quiet confidence she'd earned running one of our regional offices. Judith looked tense, already flipping through notes on her tablet. My second cousin Peter Aldridge arrived next, his sons Beau and Drake beside him, with daughter Abigail walking just behind, sharp-eyed, observant, already reading the room. From San Francisco came my cousin Theodore Aldridge, still in a travel coat, having come straight from the airport without stopping at home. My granduncle James Aldridge, the younger brother of my grandfather with his children and grandchildren including the well-known actress Julia Aldridge and her son Timothy Aldridge, just turned 18 years old days before. Julia looked stunning like always and Timothy nervous and excited. More followed. From different states, different branches, different lives. But all descended from Oliver Wilfred Aldridge and they kept coming. Douglas Aldridge, Rupert Aldridge, Susanna Aldridge, Cindy Aldridge, Russell Aldridge with twin sons Chase and Chad Aldridge. By the time the doors were finally closed, 32 people had gathered around the table, the remaining on a secure video link. The Aldridge family room was unlike any boardroom most people would recognize. It wasn't flashy. The walls were lined with dark walnut paneling, worn smooth in places by decades of use. Framed photographs trace the family's history, not posed portraits, but candid moments, groundbreakings, factory floors, ribbon cuttings, family dinners that had quietly doubled as strategy meetings. A long, solid oak table dominated the center of the room. It had been custom built in the 1950s, wide enough that no one sat at the head. That was intentional. Decisions here were meant to be collective, even if leadership was clear. High-backed leather chairs surrounded it, each one bearing the subtle marks of time. No nameplates. No hierarchy displayed. At one end of the room stood a large map, properties marked across 5 states, pins replaced over the years as holdings expanded and evolved. At the other end, a glass case held original trust documents, yellowed with age but immaculately preserved. This room wasn't about power. It was about continuity. When the last person took their seat, the room went quiet without being asked. My grandfather remained standing. He rested both hands on the table and looked around at the faces gathered before him. Family members, leaders, beneficiaries, guardians of something larger than themselves. Then he spoke. "We are here," he said evenly, "because the system we built failed a child." No one interrupted. No one shifted uncomfortably. Every person in that room understood the implication. This meeting wasn't about correcting a technicality. It was about deciding who the Aldridges were willing to be, when the rules they trusted collided with the responsibility they carried. My grandfather waited until everyone was seated. 37 people. 3 generations. Every living adult descendant of Oliver Wilfred Aldridge who could physically be present. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We are here because we failed Oliver," Alan Cornelius Aldridge said. No one looked away. "We built a system to protect this family from outsiders, from manipulation, from entitlement," he continued. "And in doing so, we forgot the most important thing we were supposed to protect. Our children." He told them everything. Not emotionally. Not defensively. Fact by fact. The name change. The adoption. The trust provisions activating exactly as designed. The isolation that followed. The threats. The recordings. The police. How, he asked quietly, did an 11-year-old child manage to leave this family without a single adult stopping to ask why? No one answered. "We all assumed the system was working," he said. "We told ourselves that consequences teach responsibility. But Oliver wasn't exercising agency. He was surviving pressure. He looked around the table. We knew that boy. His character, his kindness, and his loyalty. And still, we let paperwork speak louder than judgment. He straightened. That ends tonight. A document was slid across the table, drafted in real time by trustees and counsel who had been standing by. A new clause, my grandfather said. Effective immediately. He read it aloud. No Aldridge minor shall be permitted to voluntarily change their legal surname prior to the age of 18. Any request for name change thereafter shall require a mandatory family review, including direct consultation with the patriarch or designated guardian, ensuring the individual fully understands the legal, financial, and familial consequences of such a change. This is not about control, Allen said. It's about protection. A child cannot consent to the loss of identity they do not yet understand. He looked directly at us. We cannot design systems that punish children for adult manipulation. One by one, voices spoke. Agreement, regret, responsibility. Vivian spoke about how opportunity had shaped her life. Peter spoke about how easily fear can override reason in a child. Abigail spoke about power imbalance and silence. No one opposed it. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. 35 hands raised. Not for money, not for legacy, for a child. My grandfather placed his signature on the amendment last. The Aldridge name, he said, is not a test children must passive. It is a shelter they are born into. He closed the folder. And tonight, he added, we remember that. No applause followed. Just quiet resolve. Outside the room, the city continued on as if nothing had changed. Inside, a family corrected its course, not by rewriting the past, but by making sure no other child would ever have to carry that weight alone again. Robert McCoy acted immediately. He didn't celebrate the vote. He didn't comment on the emotion of it. The moment the family meeting adjourned, he was already on the phone, calling his state attorneys, trust specialists, and family law judges who had known the Aldridge name for decades. By midnight, the new clause had been drafted, cross-referenced, and fortified. By dawn, it was enforceable. Robert worked through the night to integrate the amendment into the trust framework in a way that made it legally unassailable. It wasn't just added, it was woven into the structure itself, tied to existing provisions governing beneficiary protections, guardianship oversight, and coercion safeguards. Every possible loophole was closed. No Aldridge minor could legally change their surname before the age of 18. No exception could be granted without direct, documented confirmation from the patriarch or a designated guardian that the child understood, fully and independently, what such a change meant. Any violation would automatically trigger a review for coercion and invalidate the action retroactively. Robert didn't rely on goodwill. He relied on precedent, jurisdictional layering, and redundancy. By morning, the amendment had been notarized, filed, and registered across every relevant trust jurisdiction. It was done. The next day, Robert was back in court. He met directly with the judge overseeing Oliver's case, armed with the recordings, CPS findings, psychological evaluations, and now the formal family action acknowledging systemic failure and corrective intent. They didn't waste time. The judge reviewed the materials in silence, then spoke plainly. Consent obtained under threat is not consent, she said, especially not from a minor. Within hours, the court issued its ruling. The adoption was voided. The name change was reversed. Not suspended, not delayed, corrected. Official records were amended immediately. Birth certificates restored. Court registries updated. School and medical systems notified before the day was over. By close of business, Oliver was once again, legally and unequivocally, Oliver Allen Aldridge. Robert coordinated with CPS, the school district, and the family trust in parallel. No gaps. No confusion. No room for reinterpretation. Jeffrey's attorneys filed objections that went nowhere. There was nothing left to argue. The law had caught up to the truth. That evening, Robert called me. It's finished, he said simply. I didn't ask for details. I already knew what mattered. My son, I asked. Protected, he replied, and restored. I hung up and went upstairs. Oliver was sitting on his bed, hoodie pulled tight around him, scrolling absently on his phone. When he looked up, I could see the question in his eyes, the one he was afraid to ask. I sat beside him. It's official, I said. Your name is back. He stared at me for a second. Then his shoulders dropped, like he'd been holding something heavy for far too long. I'm still me? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. You always were. The law just caught up. He nodded once. And for the first time since all of this began, the future didn't feel like something we had to fight for. It felt like something we could finally begin to heal inside. The system moved quickly. Once Oliver's name was legally restored to Aldridge and his adoption formally voided, everything that had been suspended came back online, automatically, methodically, without debate. His beneficiary status was reinstated in full. His name reappeared in the college scholarship fund. The housing subsidy program reopened to him. His future summer internship placement at Aldridge Development was reactivated. The study abroad scholarship returned. The emergency medical fund was restored. And his future seat on the board of trustees was once again reserved. Every system that had once gone silent now recognized him again. Not as a favor, not as an exception, as if the interruption had never occurred. Aldridge Academy followed immediately. His place at the school was formally reinstated, along with his acceptance into Aldridge Academy's summer enrichment program. The administration worked closely with Robert and the family office to ensure continuity. On paper, Oliver had never left. His records were amended to reflect uninterrupted enrollment from the start of the academic year. No gaps, no asterisks, no questions later. The faculty designed an individualized academic plan to help him catch up on the months he had missed. Smaller group instruction. One-on-one tutoring. No pressure to perform, only support to recover confidence. He could start on Monday. When I told him, he didn't cheer. He didn't ask about the money or the programs. He just sat there quietly for a moment. "Do I have to pretend nothing happened?" he asked. "No," I said. "You just get to move forward." He nodded, like that was exactly what he needed to hear. This time, the system wasn't rewarding a name. It was correcting a mistake and giving a 12-year-old boy back the stability he should never have lost. I also contacted Riverside Central Middle School, not just to withdraw Oliver, but to make sure what had happened there didn't disappear quietly. I sent the administration everything, the names, the messages. The screenshots I'd found on Oliver's phone. There was no drama in their response. No defensiveness. They acknowledged the failure and acted. The students involved were disciplined appropriately under the school's policies. Mandatory counseling. Suspensions where warranted. Clear documentation placed in their records. It wasn't about punishment for its own sake. It was about drawing a line. Before closing the matter, I made a donation to the school, earmarked specifically for an anti-bullying initiative, training for staff, clear reporting systems for students, real consequences paired with education. Oliver wouldn't be there to benefit from it, but someone else would. There was one bright spot from Riverside Central, a boy named Braxton Pierce, smart, observant, kind in a way that didn't seek attention. He'd noticed Oliver early on, not as a target, but as someone alone. He sat with him at lunch when no one else would, walked with him between classes, treated him like a person when it would have been easier to look away. Braxton hadn't made Oliver's life a living hell. He'd made it survivable. Braxton came from a family with very little. Money was always tight. Opportunity even tighter. But it was obvious, immediately, that he had something rare, intelligence paired with decency. I paid for a full scholarship. Not as charity, as a payback. Braxton accepted with disbelief, then quiet determination. He didn't boast. He didn't ask for special treatment. And he thrived. At Aldridge Academy, his curiosity lit up classrooms. His kindness anchored him socially. Teachers noticed. Students respected him. He belonged there. Oliver and Braxton started at Aldridge Academy the following Monday. The first day was awkward. Of course it was. Some classmates didn't know what to say. Some knew pieces of the story. Some had made assumptions. Mason and Freddie stayed close to Oliver, guiding him through the halls, pulling him into conversations, grounding him when things felt overwhelming. Eventually, Oliver did something brave. He told his story, not dramatically, not bitterly, just honestly. And something unexpected happened. Easton, Philip, Tanner, Ethan. They came over, hesitant, embarrassed, clearly ashamed of how they distanced themselves. They apologized. Not with excuses. Just apologies. Oliver listened. Then he forgave them. The circle widened again, this time including Braxton. Different from before, stronger, kinder. Watching them together, laughing, arguing about homework, planning weekends, I felt something loosen inside my chest. The damage hadn't disappeared, but it was healing. And this time, Oliver wasn't rebuilding alone. Although Oliver returned to school almost immediately, nothing was rushed. He was under observation. Doctors monitored his weight carefully, adjusting his meals and supplements until his body began to recover. His sleep patterns were tracked, his stress levels evaluated. Every small change mattered. No one assumed he was fine just because he was smiling again. Therapy began right away. Not to fix him, not to label him, but to give him words for what he had lived through: fear, confusion, guilt that never belonged to him. To help him understand that what happened wasn't weakness or failure. It was survival. Some days he came home exhausted, not from schoolwork, but from learning how to feel safe again. Some nights he slept in his old room, curled up under familiar blankets, comforted by the fact that nothing there had changed. Other nights he stood in my doorway, quiet, uncertain. "Can you stay?" he would ask. I never said no. I'd sit beside him until his breathing slowed, sometimes long after he'd fallen asleep. Sometimes he'd wake briefly and reach for my hand without opening his eyes. I was there every time. Weeks passed like that, uneventful on the surface, but full of quiet progress. Then one evening, as I was getting ready to leave his room, he spoke. "Dad, was it really not my fault?" I sat back down immediately. "Never," I said without hesitation. "Not even a little." He searched my face like he needed to make sure I wasn't just saying it because I was supposed to. I held his gaze. "You were a kid," I continued. "You were scared. You did the best you could with the information you had. None of this belongs to you." He nodded slowly. Not like he was convinced. Like he was saving it. Tucking the truth away somewhere safe, to return to when the doubts came back. I brushed his hair back gently. "You don't have to carry that anymore," I said. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed that one day he wouldn't. I started therapy too. At first, I told myself it was just to support Oliver, to model stability, to show him that asking for help wasn't weakness. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The truth was that I was drowning in guilt. I replayed everything endlessly. Every hesitation. Every moment I'd mistaken silence for strength. Every sign he'd sent without saying the words directly. I had been so focused on respecting what I thought was his choice that I missed how afraid he really was. I had to face the hardest thought of all, that in his hour of greatest need, I had stepped back when I should have stepped forward. That I had abandoned him, not physically, but emotionally, by believing the story adults had built around him instead of trusting my instincts as his father. Therapy didn't let me hide from that. It also didn't let me drown in it. Slowly, I learned to separate responsibility from blame. To understand that manipulation works precisely because it exploits trust, pride, and good intentions. That I hadn't failed because I didn't care, but because I cared and believed others were acting in good faith. I learned that guilt can either become a prison or a teacher, and that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the damage didn't happen. It means accepting that two people, one child and one father, were targeted, pressured, and isolated by someone who knew exactly how to exploit power. In time, I learned to forgive myself. Not all at once. Not easily. But honestly, I apologized to Oliver, not once, but whenever he needed to hear it. And I let him see that adults can admit when they're wrong without falling apart. We talked openly about what manipulation looks like. About how fear distorts choices. About how love doesn't demand silence or sacrifice. And somewhere along the way, something shifted. I stopped defining myself by the moment I failed him, and started defining myself by every moment after, when I stayed, when I listened, when I chose to protect him no matter how uncomfortable it was. We had both been manipulated, but we were no longer alone. And that, more than anything, was how healing began. Brooke arrived at the courthouse late. She didn't look like the woman who used to glide into rooms certain of her place in them. She looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes tired, her confidence stripped down to raw nerves and regret. The certainty she had once carried like armor was gone. She spotted me in the hallway and hesitated before walking over, like she wasn't sure she still had the right. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice breaking. Tears streaked down her face before she could stop them. "I swear to you, William, I didn't know he was saying those things to Oliver." I studied her for a moment. I believed she hadn't known everything. I didn't believe she hadn't known enough. "You let him make decisions out of fear," I said quietly. Not to wound her, but because it needed to be said. You didn't ask why an 11-year-old suddenly wanted to erase his own name. You didn't listen when he hesitated, when he went quiet. You supported the name change. She covered her mouth, her breathing uneven. "I thought I was giving him a better life," she whispered. "More stability. More opportunity. I thought love was enough." "You gave him terror," I replied. Not angrily, not accusingly, just truthfully. You handed him over to someone who used fear as leverage, and you didn't look closely enough to see it. She sank down onto a bench, sobbing now, not dramatically, but the kind of crying that comes when denial finally collapses. I failed him, she said. I failed our son. That was the first time she'd said it like that. Not my son, but our son. The court didn't rush her redemption. Supervised visitation was ordered. Counseling was mandated. Brooke didn't argue. She didn't negotiate. She accepted every condition without protest. The first visit was awkward. Oliver sat stiffly at the table in the supervised room, not angry, not cold, just unsure. Brooke cried the entire time. She apologized too much. She tried too hard. The therapist guided them gently, reminding her that rebuilding trust doesn't start with explanations. It starts with listening. So Brooke learned to sit with silence, to let Oliver speak when he was ready, to hear the anger without defending herself, to hear the fear without minimizing it. Progress came slowly. Some days Oliver didn't want to see her. Those days were respected. Other days he asked questions, hard ones, and she answered them honestly, without excuses. She showed up consistently, not grandly, not dramatically, just present. Over time, Oliver began to relax a little in her presence. He stopped flinching when she reached for him. He started talking about school again, about Braxton, about baseball. One evening after a session, he asked me quietly, "Do you think Mom can change?" I didn't answer immediately. I said carefully, that people can change when they finally see the damage they've done and decide they'll never look away again. He nodded, considering that. Brooke wasn't restored to the life she had before, but she was slowly, carefully earning a place in the life Oliver had now. Not as someone who knew best, but as someone learning, finally, to protect the child she loved. Christmas 2025 came gently, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, like a deep breath after a long year. Oliver and I decorated the house together. He insisted on doing it properly, which meant unpacking every ornament, even the broken ones we kept for sentiment. He played music too loud, sang badly on purpose, and laughed when the lights tangled for the third time. He was excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not anxious excitement, not performative joy. Real, unguarded happiness. A few days before Christmas, he had a sleepover, his first one in a long time. Mason and Freddie were there. Braxton too. Easton, Philip, Tanner, and Ethan came later with sleeping bags and snacks. The house was loud and chaotic and alive. I fell asleep on the couch listening to them argue about movies and video games, smiling in the dark. On Christmas Eve, my parents hosted the annual feast. The same one they had hosted every year for as long as I could remember. The house glowed with warm light. The long dining table was filled with familiar dishes passed down through generations. Laughter echoed through the rooms the way it used to, easy, unforced. It felt restored, not erased, not forgotten, but whole again. Oliver moved easily among his cousins, confident, relaxed. My mother kept sneaking him extra desserts. Alicia teased him the way she always had. My father watched him quietly, pride written all over his face. At the end of the evening, my father stood and raised his glass. The room fell silent. "I want to say something," he said, his voice steady but full. "This year reminded us all that strength doesn't always look like winning." He looked directly at Oliver. "Sometimes it looks like surviving," he continued. "Sometimes it looks like telling the truth when you're scared. And sometimes it looks like holding on to who you are when others try to tell you that you're not enough." Oliver's cheeks flushed. "I want to toast Oliver," my father said, "for being brave, for being resilient, and for reminding all of us what really matters." Glasses lifted. Voices joined. Oliver looked at me, eyes bright. And in that moment, surrounded by family, laughter, and love, I knew something deep and certain. The past hadn't broken him. It had shaped him. And the future finally felt safe again. In January, I decided to give Oliver something back. He had turned 12 in the middle of everything. The adoption, the pressure, the public declaration that he was someone else. That birthday had been loud, expensive, and empty. I didn't want that to be the memory he carried. So I chose a quiet Saturday morning and decided we would rewrite it. I woke up early, tied the balloons myself, far too many of them, and placed the large silver 1 and 2 in the hallway outside his room. When I opened his door, I was holding a small cake with candles and a ridiculous number of helium balloons trailing behind me. "Happy birthday," I said softly. He blinked, confused, still half asleep. But my birthday was months ago, he said. I smiled. That one doesn't count, I whispered. Today you get a 12-year-old birthday you'll always remember. It took him a moment to understand. Then he smiled. Slowly at first, then fully. By the time he came downstairs, the house was already full. My parents were in the kitchen. Alicia was pretending to organize plates. Joshua and the boys were trying to act casual, even though they were terrible at it. The dining table was covered with all of Oliver's favorites: pancakes stacked too high, bacon, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, chocolate milk. The large balloons shaped like 12 stood near the table, along with another set spelling out Oliver. He just stood there for a second, taking it in. No speeches. No cameras shoved in his face. Just warmth. He opened gifts between bites of pancakes, laughing when Mason handed him something clearly wrapped by Freddie with absolutely no effort at neatness. My mother fussed over him. Alicia insisted on hugging him twice. It was chaotic and imperfect and real. Later in the afternoon, his friends arrived. Braxton was the first one through the door, carrying a small, carefully wrapped gift. Then Easton, Philip, Tanner, and Ethan. The house filled with noise again, the good kind. Video games. Music. Running up and down the stairs. There was a cake in the afternoon. Large, chocolate, slightly uneven because I had insisted on baking it myself. 12 candles. No speeches. Just everyone singing loudly and off-key. When he blew them out, I didn't make a wish for him. He had earned his own. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, I walked him to his room. He was tired in the best possible way. As I turned off the light, he stopped me. "Dad," he said softly. "Yeah?" He hesitated, then looked up at me. "Thank you." I brushed his hair back from his forehead. "For what?" "For today," he said. "I'll always remember this as my real birthday." I nodded, not trusting my voice for a second. When I closed his door, I stood in the hallway for a long moment. We couldn't erase what had happened, but we could choose which memories would define us. And that night, the memory that won was joy. The trial began in January later. By then, the illusion Jeffrey had built around himself was gone. The expensive attorneys, the tailored suits, the calm confidence of a man who believed he could outmaneuver consequences, none of it mattered once the evidence was laid out in open court. The prosecution didn't rush. They didn't need to. From the first day, the narrative was clear. This was not a custody dispute, not a misunderstanding, not a man who had lost his temper. This was a calculated campaign. The state laid out Jeffrey's motive early. He had learned about the Aldridge family trust long before the adoption paperwork ever surfaced. Brooke had mentioned it casually at first: old money, strict rules, complicated clauses. Jeffrey had asked questions, lots of them, quiet ones. He'd researched on his own. What he discovered fascinated him. Not just the money, though that mattered, but the structure, the permanence, the power that came from proximity to a legacy he would never earn himself. Adopting Oliver wasn't about fatherhood. It was about access. And beyond that, it was about conquest. Jeffrey liked winning. Winning socially. Winning financially. Winning personally. Taking Brooke from her ex-husband had been part of that. But taking everything, the name, the child, the future, was something else entirely. It fed something darker. At first, the manipulation had been subtle. He spoiled Oliver with gifts, trips, and praise. He positioned himself as the fun adult, the one who was always available. He reinforced the idea that William was absent, outdated, insufficient. He flattered Brooke, told her she was brave, that she deserved more, that the Aldridge rules were controlling and archaic. When that wasn't enough, when Oliver hesitated, when he expressed doubt, Jeffrey escalated. The prosecution played the recordings, not all of them, just enough. The courtroom went silent as Jeffrey's voice filled the space, cold, deliberate, terrifying in its certainty. The hitman, the sniper, the threats against William, against Brooke, against extended family, against friends. Experts testified next. Oliver didn't testify in court. He didn't have to. A child psychologist met with him instead, slowly, gently, over several sessions. He talked about the threats, the lies, the fear that every night his father might be killed because of something he said or didn't say. He talked about recording the videos because he thought, if something happens, someone has to know it wasn't my fault. When the psychologist finished her report, her conclusion was clear: this child did not consent. He complied under sustained psychological duress. That single sentence changed everything. Child psychologists explain how sustained terror rewires a child's decision-making, how fear collapses free will, how compliance under threat is not consent. They explained how Oliver had survived by recording evidence, an act of remarkable presence of mind for a child under constant psychological assault. Then came the financial evidence. Prosecutors showed emails, searches, and communications demonstrating Jeffrey's interest in the trust structure, his assumptions, his belief that adoption would grant influence, if not immediate access. He hadn't just threatened a child. He had weaponized fear to force a legal outcome. Jeffrey did not testify. His attorneys advised against it. They argued exaggeration, claimed the threats were symbolic, claimed Oliver misunderstood. The jury didn't buy it, not when they heard the recordings, not when they saw the timelines, not when they learned the threats continued for nearly 2 years. The verdict came on the 9th day. Guilty on all counts. Criminal threats, child abuse, coercion, witness intimidation. The judge didn't raise her voice during sentencing. She didn't need to. "You targeted a child," she said evenly, "not in a moment of anger, but over an extended period. You used terror as leverage. You attempted to destroy familial bonds for personal gain." She paused. "The court sees no remorse, only regret that you were caught." Jeffrey was sentenced to a substantial prison term, followed by a lifetime restraining order prohibiting any contact with Oliver or the Aldridge family. His assets were frozen pending civil action. Brooke did not look at him as he was led away. She didn't need to. The victory he'd imagined over William, over the Aldridges, over a system he thought he could exploit never came. Instead, he left the courtroom stripped of status, influence, and control. Jeffrey disappeared from our lives completely. There were no final messages, no attempts at contact, no lingering presence. After the trial, he became a closed chapter, sealed by court orders, distance, and consequences that followed him quietly but firmly. Brooke divorced him within months. The mansion was sold. The cars went next. Everything that had once symbolized success and certainty was liquidated and reduced to numbers on paper. What remained wasn't freedom, it was reckoning. She moved back in with her parents for a while, stripped of independence but not of support. Later, she bought a smaller home near them, modest and practical, close enough that she could ask for help without shame. For a long time, she didn't try to explain herself. She didn't defend her choices. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, she listened. Over time, she began to say the words that mattered most, not once, not dramatically, but consistently. "I failed to protect you." She said them to Oliver. She said them to me. She said them to herself. Supervised visits continued for months. They were structured, careful, sometimes awkward. Brooke showed up every time. On time. Prepared and present. She learned to follow Oliver's lead instead of directing it. Slowly, trust returned, not because it was demanded, but because it was earned. Supervised visits became extended afternoons. Extended afternoons became weekends. Eventually, supervision was no longer necessary. Normal visitation resumed, not as a right reclaimed, but as a responsibility accepted. Brooke didn't try to be the mother she had once imagined herself to be. She became the mother Oliver actually needed. And that, more than any apology, was what allowed our family to move forward. February came softly. Winter had settled in, but it no longer felt harsh. The house was warm in the evenings, filled with small routines that didn't demand attention yet somehow meant everything. Oliver was back to being a kid. Not untouched by what had happened, never that, but no longer defined by it. Most mornings, we ate breakfast together at the kitchen counter. He complained about early classes. I complained about traffic. Some afternoons he came home excited, other days quiet, both of which were allowed. Therapy was still part of his life, as natural now as homework or baseball practice. Some nights we talked. Other nights we didn't. Both were okay. One evening in February after dinner, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. The air was cold, the sky clear. The same stars we used to count years ago were still there, steady and indifferent to human chaos. Oliver leaned against me without thinking about it. "Dad," he said after a while, "do you ever wish you could go back and change things?" I thought about it. "I wish I could have protected you sooner," I said honestly. "But I don't wish you were someone else. And I don't wish I wasn't your dad." He nodded. "I was really scared," he said quietly. "I thought if I messed up again, you'd disappear." I put my arm around him, pulling him closer. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not because of a name. Not because of a mistake. Not because of anything." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know that now. That was everything. Later that night, as I turned off the lights in his room, he stopped me. Dad? Yeah? Thank you for coming when the school called, he said. If you hadn't, I don't know. I swallowed. I'll always come, I said. That's the job. He smiled, a small, genuine smile, and lay back against his pillow. As I closed the door, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. We weren't rebuilding what was lost. We were building something stronger, not based on rules or legacies or fear of consequences, but on presence, on truth, on the quiet certainty that love doesn't vanish when tested. February passed. Spring would come. And whatever the future held, we would meet it the same way side by side.